Then you had the American period. Well, in real life, it doesn't work that way. People don't fall into little boxes, and the same period, the same people that were in one group will appear in another group. And there was very little written documents. There were very few books written. There's practically nothing written about plantation life. It just doesn't exist. So you have to, in many cases, use your imagination, read what documents you can find, and try to construct a story, a coherent story. And I mentioned before, this was a DuPont plantation right here, right where we're at. Now, the DuPonts were chased off their land by an Indian attack in 1803, 1802, 1803, and they never returned for many, many years. Their lands were seized and sold to of all people, a Catholic priest in St. Augustine ended up owning the DuPont lands. And there's a very mysterious story here. Later, Mr. Hernandez purchased these lands, and that's how it became Melicompra. But the DuPonts were very much first families here. They were here long before anyone else. And it might interest you, the other night I was on the DuPont plantation. They still own an immense plantation just south of the park, the Flagler Park. I'm losing my name right now. Prince's Place. Immediately south of Prince's Place is a huge plantation still owned by the DuPont family. They very much own it. Okay, this is ITT period. If you look on your right, to me, this is the epitome of ITT. This is when this great corporation came in to develop this area. They spent jillions of dollars on hotels, infrastructure, roads, water drainage, all this stuff. And this was quite amazing. And to me, as you look over here, it gives you a very good view of what was going on. This was European Village on your left, which sort of went into the toilet for a while, but it's coming back amazingly well. There are fine restaurants in there. Sometimes on a Saturday you can't even get into the place. It's so popular and so successful. Now we're going to make a left here on a very old plantation road. This road is so old, it has no name. Today we call it Palm Harbor Parkway, but this was the site of several Hernandez plantations. He owned several plantations in this area. Again, growing sugar cane and cotton and oranges. Now, Mr. Hernandez had a problem. How to get his produce out? Well, at that time, there was a windy little creek called Long's Creek, going north that connected up with the Matanzas River. At that time, there was a lot more water in Long's Creek than there is today. It was a much larger body of water. He deduced that he could build a seaport here and put flatboats loaded with barrels of oranges and sugar and flatboat them north on this Long's Creek up to where the Matanzas River connected to the ocean. Then they would use longboats and lighters and flatboats to carry this merchandise out to the ocean-going ships, and they would ship Florida oranges to London, to downtown London. I found in some of my research that the British enjoyed a drink called Flip, F-L-I-P, which was ground up Florida oranges, some rum, some sugar, heat well and drink. Sounds tasty, huh? I think I'd really like to have someone make some, because it sounds really good. But anyway, these were Florida oranges being drunk in London. And where did they come from? Right here. This intercoastal river didn't exist, but he used to take merchandise on the road we're right now. If you can imagine mules and wagons being hauled by mules, and they'd come up from his plantations right where we are right now. And a few years back, the city of Palm Coast got a money grant, and they built a park here. Actually, it's a nature park. But later, through Mr. Hadid and other historians, we found out that this Long Creek Nature Preserve was actually a colonial, time of George Washington, shipping port, seaport. And here it is. So we're going to come up on it right now. No one knows it's here. When they opened the park, they got they got me as a speaker, and they said, well, we don't want to talk about the history. It's a nature park, so you got 10 minutes. So I said, well, there was an awful lot of history here, folks, and that was about the size of it. But this was a colonial seaport. And this is another place that I would like on a weekend that you visit, because it's got one of the coolest little walkways going down to Long Creek. And if you walk down there, you're going to see seabirds of all kinds. You're going to see giant turtles. You're going to see fish jumping all over the place. No one seems to know it's here. It is a good launching point for kayaks, for people that are into kayaking. But anyway, Longs Creek goes north and connects with the Matanzas River. It used to be a lot bigger than it was. It's a park. Now we're going to turn into the park, and on your immediate right, you'll see a little dirt pathway on your right now, on your right. And if you walk down that pathway, you'll walk into paradise. There's just a beautiful place down there, which is full of nature, birds. You'll see the creek, you'll see fish jumping, and that's the seaport right there. That's where they would flatboat the oranges and the sugar and the cotton to ocean-going ships. Don't look for signage, because there is no signage. The city of Palm Coast has a plan to have some nature or some archaeological studies done here, but there's no time frame, so I can't say when it'll happen, if ever. But this is the Long Creek Nature Park. It was built as a nature park, and they did a good job. I mean, it's a beautiful place. It's a nice place for a picnic lunch. Stop here. But no one knows about that little path there. And again, I offer this to you. It's not too arduous. If you can trouble walking, you have no trouble on this path. And it'll take you onto a wood walkway. It'll take you right down to the creek. And it is absolutely stunning. It is beautiful down that little place. And I want you to know about it. It's a nice thing to do on a weekend. Take a sandwich, take your binoculars, and you'll see all sorts of birds and wildlife down there. Now, if you want to know about this stuff, it's all in my book. And I got the Spanish land grants and the story and all that stuff. I'm not doing this on this tour. We only do little bits and pieces. So, Mr. Long is buried here a few hundred yards from where we're at, and he's the oldest grave in Flagler County. And that brings about another story. In fact, I felt that young Beulah was murdered in St. Augustine, and it's like a cold case murder, and I think I could prove that he was murdered. And I think I could pretty much prove it. And Mr. Long's death, he was killed by Indians, and he's buried, as I say, within a few hundred yards from where we are right now. And it's the oldest grave in Flagler County. But that's another story entirely. We're not going to go on a tour of this. It's in the book. That's why they call it Longs Creek, by the way. Every story in Flagler County generates another story. Why is that? Because, you know, there's no such thing as a Spanish period. There are people that lived here under Spanish rule, but the next thing they knew, they were living here under American rule. So they were Americans, the same people. And history isn't so old. Think about this. My father was 22 years old in 1918. In July of 1918, he was the Marconi operator for the Naval Marconi Station on Fire Island. My father. Think about that for a minute. Time. 1918. July. And that's another story. So, you know, time, we tend to get mixed up in time. We say, oh, he's 80 years old. He's old. He's 90 years old. He's old. He's 103. Well, maybe she is old at 103. But people pass through these periods that historians love to write in history books. But it's the same people. It's the same family. It's the same story. These stories, unfortunately, rarely get written down or told, so you never hear them. So you hear them on a little tour like this, or maybe you go to Williamsburg, you got some people in white wigs telling you about the American Revolution. But remember, this place was in full bore before Williamsburg even existed. This place is much older than Williamsburg. The people up in St. Augustine are proud of what they've got, and they should be. But keep in mind that they were soldiers for the most part. The farmers were down here in Flagler County. The people that were growing stuff were here. The Spanish didn't grow stuff up north. They grew stuff down here. And that's where we're at right now. The history of Florida agriculture is right here where we're at.